finished Tottenham Hotspur 1, Newcastle United 2. A really good watch. Mark Donaldson alongside Janusz Mihalik. Did the right team win today, Janusz?
Maybe just. I mean, it's so difficult to talk about that because Jekyll and Hyde in terms of Spurs. What we saw in the first half and the second half. The decisions that were made ahead of the game as well. So obviously, what we saw from Spurs, I think they look at this, in my mind, as an opportunity loss, and to be quite frank, it seemed to me self-inflicted by Ange Postecoglou.
So Solanke scores an early opener for Spurs, and they kind of came flying out the traps. However, I'm going to take you back to 2024. Only once did Spurs keep a clean sheet at home in the Premier League. That was against Everton in August in a 4-0 win. So even though they go 1-0 up, and it's a great start, it's a good goal, it's a super delivery from Pedro Porro, you feel that they're going to need more than that, but they did get themselves off to a good start. What did you make of the goal?
Well, I mean, it's obviously a turnover, a little bit of a pressure. There's a question mark about the handball, which I think the decision was right. Let's be honest here, right? So what I think of it, something that we've seen from Spurs, and, that brings us to Ange. And yeah, I mean, it's difficult because he's right. With all these injuries, Marsh, we've talked. I mean, it's impossible. I'm going to stop short of making excuses for him. I'm not going to give him a complete pass. But I'm going to give him benefit of the doubt on this one because we know that Spurs can score. They've been showing that even when they don't have a good run as it stands right now. But I also have seen from Ange Postecoglou in the beginning of last season that they can defend. They were the best defense for a long period of time until that, Mark, you and I were there, right? I mean, we keep talking about it. Until that Chelsea game at home, they were a good team. So I know it's in it. And we've been now criticizing Ange Postecoglou, probably for the right reasons, and we'll get to it now because I think we have to in terms of selecting and starting 11. But I will give him a benefit of the doubt because what are we going to do? I mean, you see that back four. You even saw it in the second half when Dragushin was withdrawn. It's probably, remember, last game for Spurs, he was kind of, he wasn't 100%. He played, so there's probably a bit of an injury there. But the bottom line is that Dragushin isn't good, and then you have Jet Spence moving in and playing at center back. I mean, they have literally nobody there, not to mention a 18-year-old goalkeeper that hasn't played for 3.5 years, right, making his debut and doing all right. So at some point, we have to acknowledge that, right? Not as an excuse, but as a reality that Spurs are in right now. And it's impossible. What are you going to say? There's just nobody there that can properly defend. And every game you have a different back four and a different goalkeeper on top of that.
That's spot on. I think. I mean, today's not the game. If Ange ends up getting sacked in the kind of short-term future, this isn't a game you'll look back on and go, that was one of the reasons why. Because Brandon Austin came in, did fine. Did fine, the young goalkeeper. They brought on Sergio Reguilon at halftime, as you mentioned, for Dragushin. And in the second half, they played all right. We'll get to the Newcastle goals in a second. We're just trying to set up Spurs here. And they had good width from wide areas. Pedro Porro getting forward, Sergio Reguilon getting forward in the second half. The problem is, and it's especially like this in the first half, they were just too open. So even after scoring the opening goal, but that's Spurs, and Andrew says he's not going to change. Well, that's fine. Well, you've got to score more goals. If you're not going to change and you're going to concede 2 or 3 goals every game, then you're going to have to score 3 or 4, and they only got 1 today. So after they got that first goal from Dominic Solanke, then it was mainly all Newcastle between then and halftime. And it was the way that Newcastle scored their goals. They obviously got one back from Anthony Gordon to equalise. And then they had the delivery from wide right. Dragushin got the touch, and then it was the finish from Alexander Isak. But you could see it coming, couldn't you? Is there something Spurs could have done after scoring that might have prevented Newcastle from getting as much space?
Yes. They could have played Son and Madison. I mean, that's not that you're wrong, Mark, but I mean, in the first half, they score early and Spurs looked like they just wanted to survive at home. right? I mean, this was a team that historically has been good at home, not as of late, right? But I mean, look, I don't know what the motivation was. I mean, we can't get in Ange's head, right? But he was looking ahead of Liverpool that won 6-3 just a couple of weeks ago here, because he said, "I win something in the second half." Now I'm speculating, of course, but managers always come out there and tell you that what's most important, the next game. Well, usually the next game to me means the present one, unless he really meant the next game, which is on Wednesday. First half, Mark, after they score early, they had 4 touches in Newcastle's penalty area.
Yeah.
Well, second half was absolutely different, right? No coincidence that Son comes in, Madison, and oh, by the way, Bissouma, right? Bergvall played really, really well. You saw the reactions of the fans, but statistically, it wasn't great. He conceded a lot of, bad passes, and I mean, he looked right for the young player, and he took the responsibility on his shoulder. But did you see Bissouma when he came in? I mean, I think he's made 28 out of 29 passes in the second half. And he didn't really play all that long, if you look at it. So won everything that he needed to win. So it was a totally different game. And again, we're speculating, but it's fair to say that probably not playing 2 key players like that, looking ahead maybe to Liverpool, right? Stop the bleeding, Ange. That's the most important thing. Play them. Maybe you get a result here, and that will bode well against Liverpool, because most likely you're not going to get anything out of it. So I don't know what the explanation may be. I may find out that all of a sudden, that was because of sickness or illness going on. Although I think Ange said that he just made a decision on Son ahead of the game. So this is an issue. And we don't know what would have happened. But based on what I saw in the second half, when you have players like Son, when you have players like Madison and change the game, hey, I have to go to that, because second half showed me, as you pointed out, this isn't a game. They showed grit. They showed more quality. This was not a special performance by a Newcastle team, by the way.
No, and they dug in and they got all 3 points, despite the fact there was 10 minutes of added time at the end of the second half, which became 12 minutes of added time. Just come back to Son, because I wanted to bring that up with regards to the team selection. Son was left out, as was Madison, as was Bissouma, as Janusz has quite rightly mentioned. Now, you look at that and you go, why is he doing that? Why is he playing a player in Timo Werner who he publicly castigated just a few weeks ago for his attitude and his performance? Well, of course, there's redemption stories in football. So I think you have to see both sides of the coin here. Yeah, they played better when Son came on, when Madison came on, when Bissouma came on. But these 3 have played of late, and they're still open. And this is the problem for Spurs. I love watching them, because you never know what you're going to get. You're going to get goals, but you don't really know, apart from that, what else you're going to get. The problem here is, yes, Son came on, made a difference, as did Madison, as did Bissouma. But they didn't score when they were on the field. And they've played, the 3 of them, from the start, and Spurs have still been open. So it doesn't really matter who they're playing right now. It seems to be the shape of the team that's the issue.
Yeah, but if you look at the goals conceded, right, it came out of the press. It didn't come in transition. I don't think that today necessarily that openness was an issue, because Newcastle didn't really explore that. The only issue they had, which Ange saw, by withdrawing Dragushin, it wasn't so much him, but you saw Jacob Murphy. I mean, look, he gave him a warning. Remember when Isak just missed it? And then that second goal was identical on the right-hand side, where Murphy delivered that pass across the 6-yard box. First time, Isak misses. 4 minutes later, literally, it's this Isak scores. Dragushin, I know, gets a touch. So that was an area of concern, and I think that's why you saw Reguilón coming in for the most part, right? It was a consequence, and I don't know what happened to Dragushin, other than the fact, as I said, to me, he's not a very good player. But anyway, and neither here or there for this. But it wasn't because of that openness necessarily, Mark. I think in this particular game, because as I've said, aside from that, I didn't see anything spectacular from Newcastle, other than the fact that they're doing, what they're supposed to do. Not just 5 straight wins, but when you look at wins in a festive, season, 2 back-to-back away wins at Old Trafford. And here again, Spurs, right? I don't care where these teams are. Those are big names, and those are still a massive wins for a club like Newcastle on the road.
I think it's the manner of the win today, and I think you're right, Janusz, because I don't know if they got out of second. They might have got into third gear, but they didn't really need to get beyond that, yeah, there were a couple of scares near the end. There was one where it was pinged across the goal and then pinged back by Reguilon after Brennan Johnson had sent it across goal. But it wasn't a case of them surviving today. I thought they handled the game pretty well with Spurs having a lot of the ball. Now, a couple of things about Newcastle. You're right. That was a win at Old Trafford and a win at Spurs. That's 6 big points out of 6. 3 of the next 4 are at home against teams that they should be beating. They know that this weekend they cannot finish any lower than 5th now, having got the win, because they're 4 points clear of Manchester City. So from a Newcastle perspective, are they now thinking, you know what, the Champions League spot for us and a return to the group stages, bearing in mind there's likely to be 5 English teams and not 4 in the group stage of the Champions League next year? Is that something that should be forefront in their mind because they've got the momentum the way they're playing right now?
Absolutely, major goal. They've learned, right? The first time around in the Champions League, started well that first game, if you remember, and then paid the price. But that experience is going to go a long way. Let's not forget that Newcastle not that long ago were in a position that
they were in the same position as Spurs.
Yeah, Spurs, right? I mean, bad start, injuries. That happens, and we have to talk about it because it's not. It is a part of an excuse as well. It's impossible to do what Spurs have to do right now. But they have that experience. They have a lot more balance, right? I mean, look at the way they managed the game. They knew they weren't at their best. Fabian Schär is so important to him, suspended today. Botman, of course, a great player, but he's just coming back from such a long injury and paid the price, right? I mean, maybe look rusty. I don't know what it was. But, if you look at that first goal, got beaten by Solanke there, didn't he, right? Maybe it's positioning. Maybe it's just the beginning of the game because, they scored so early and he comes in emergency, to be quite honest, a little bit of center back. But then Botman himself and Newcastle settled down, right? And right away answered, which is very, very important when you're on the road against an explosive team still like Spurs, because we can talk about injuries in the back, but there's a lot going forward for Spurs. As we've said, they can score goals. Defending, transition, pressing, and organization right now is a big issue for Spurs. So if you're Newcastle right now, after massive wins like that, you look at the table right now, you look at what's coming, and you say, okay, we're relatively healthy. We have stability. We've gone away from that narrative of not only a bad start, but also about Eddie Howe. Should he stay there after a bad start? Remember to talk about the England national team as well. All of that is gone, and then they can quietly work in peace towards their goal, which is the only one right now, right? I mean, it's to make it back into the top 4 or 5.
And that's the key, because right now, Manchester City are on the outside looking in if it is top 5. So you would think that if they are to get into the top 5, it would be at the expense of Nottingham Forest. But hey, who knows? But Newcastle doing their job. Just finally, Spurs. And I want to link this with Manchester United here for a reason, because there's been talk this week about Manchester United not being good, and that R word, relegation, is that something that might come into play between now and the end of the season? So I have to ask the same with Spurs, because I know it's unlikely to happen, because West Ham have got Man City this weekend, Man United have got Liverpool away. But those are 2 of the 3 teams, as well as Brentford, just below Spurs in the table. A, they're going to have to be careful that they don't let the top 10 get away from them. But B, if for some strange reason that those 3 teams were to win, then Spurs would be 14th. Is that something that, A, is Daniel Levy going to say that ain't good enough, regardless of the results? We cannot be here. And B, we're not talking relegation for Spurs, are we? Because we've been talking relegation for Man United, and they're in a similar spot.
I know why you did that, yeah, but there's no comparison between Spurs and Manchester United.
I'm just trying to find a narrative that probably
but my point is that Spurs are much, much better team than Manchester United. If you look at the squad and you look at the talent, to me, I mean, I guess that's one positive for Spurs when you have to say that Manchester United are that bad. But if you look at eventually Romero coming out, Mickey Van de Ven and Udogie and all the players that are currently injured for them, I look at squad overall. I look at the ability to score, to attack, and compare it to Manchester United. there isn't really a formation that Manchester United have that I would pick over Spurs. Now that's of course based on the fact that Spurs recover some of these players. When they do, they can actually put it together. That's going to be an edge because they are in a position that just the fact that these players may come back doesn't automatically mean that they're going to play at the top of their game.
The reason for asking the question is not so much are Spurs going to be relegated, because that ain't going to happen. It's more the players that they have. And I get they've got a lot of injuries. They're underachieving right now. And their fixtures, yeah, they've got European games. They've got Liverpool to come in the League Cup. Then they go to Tamworth in the FA Cup. Then they go to Arsenal in the Premier League and Everton in the Premier League and Hoffenheim in Europe. So that's tough. There's a lot of away games coming up. With the kind of shoe on the other foot here, looking at it the other way, is it maybe better for Spurs right now to play away from home, given the setup and the style that they have?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a precarious position right now that Spurs are in particular, Ange, because as you said, that decision today, whatever, we don't know. But if he was looking ahead to Liverpool, I don't think that's going to end well. I'm not just looking at 6-3 and saying it's going to be 7, but it could be, right? Liverpool are that good. But I mean, we're talking January 15, they're away at Arsenal. You're speaking if they're better away. I mean, if they lose to Liverpool and lose to Arsenal, you know what's going to be happening there. It already is, right? But they're going to be calling for Ange, probably rightfully so. I'm not saying that it's going to be a good decision. I'm still, as I've said, I am in his corner. He gets my benefit of the doubt. There may be a situation where you have to write this season off a little bit, but the margins are going to be very, very small, and Levy is going to be under tremendous amount of pressure. But playing away or home at this stage, I always take home. Spurs have shown that they've been very, very strong at home. But yeah, it's a situation that I don't envy, because I just look at Liverpool and Arsenal, forget everything else, and that is massive here. And if they were to lose these 2 games, and who knows, maybe even badly, it's going to be bedlam there.